The SVG path element is by far the most advanced of the SVG shapes. The SVG path element is capable of drawing both lines, arcs, and quadratic and cubic Bezier curves. If you look in the editor here on the left, I have written the outline of a path element. It contains a D attribute, and D is short for data. And inside of this, we will be writing the definition of the path to be drawn. And then the path element has a style attribute here, and you can see inside of that I have put both some stroke and fill attributes. A path is drawn using stroke and fill just like any other SVG shape. Inside the D attribute of the path element, we specify how the path is to be rendered. And we do so using a set of commands, a set of drawing commands. The drawing commands are commands to a virtual pen, which means you can move the pen and then you can ask the pen to draw something from a certain point and to another point. And the first thing we will look at here is how to move the pen to a certain point, and you do that using the uppercase M command. And now I will move the pen to 100.100 like this. Second, we need to learn how to draw a line, and you do that using the L command. So first we make a space. The space separates the commands, and then you write uppercase L, and then I write another set of coordinates, which is where to the line will be drawn. So let's try 150.150. I then save the file, and then let's have a look over here in the browser what that looks like. Now you can see there's a line drawn from the point 100 by 100 to 150.150. When the drawing commands are executed, the commands move the pen. So after this line here, this line command has been executed, the virtual pen point is now located here in the point 150, 150. To illustrate how drawing changes or moves the virtual pen point, let me draw another line here to the point 150 by 200, and let's have a look at how that looks. As you can see, the line is drawn from the end of the previous drawing command and to the coordinate specified in the next drawing command right there. You can draw arcs with the path element using the A command, and let me show you how that works. Here's a quick example. Here you see the A command, and it draws an arc to the point 100 by 100. Remember, the virtual pen point is right now in the position 150, 200. And the arc's radius will be 30 in the X direction and 50 in the Y direction. And then there are a couple of flags in here, which I will get back to later. But let's first see how this looks. As you can see, this here draws an arc from the point, the endpoint of the virtual pen before, and back up to the point 100 by 100. The third parameter to the arc command is the x-axis rotation. It's here. I've set it to 0. Most of the time you will not need to change this, so we'll just leave it to 0. The fourth and the fifth flag to the arc command are called large arc flag and sweep flag, and they decide what curve or what arc that is drawn between the 2 points. It is actually possible, or very often possible, to draw 4 different curves which are going between the 2 endpoints. In order to better illustrate this, let me first change the curve a little bit. So we make the radius in X and Y direction the same, and I change the endpoint. Now you can see there's a curve drawn from this point here and all the way to this endpoint here, which is 100 by 150. As you may also have noticed, the large arc flag is now set to 1, which means the larger of the arcs drawn possible between the 2 points is being drawn. Let's try and set this to 0. Save and see how the arc now looks. Look, now it draws a much smaller arc from the start to the end point, but still from the same starting point to the same end point. And the radius is still 50 in the x and y directions. Now look what happens when I change the sweep flag here. See, now it draws the arc the other way around. And look what happens when I now change the large arc flag back to 1 here. See, now it draws the larger arc, but in the other direction. So now you have seen that it's possible to draw 4 different arcs between a starting point and an end point, depending on the settings of the large arc flag, the first number here, and the sweep flag, which is the second number here. And the last part here, that's just the end point. You can draw quadratic Bezier curves using the Q command, and let me just copy paste the command in here and show you how the curve looks. You can see here from the end point of the last drawing command to another end point is now drawn a curve. The Q command, the quadratic Bezier curve command, takes 2 parameters. It takes 2 points as parameters. The first point here is the control point, and the control point pulls the curve like a magnet. And the second point here is the end point of the curve. To give you a better idea of how the control point pulls the curve, I will insert a circle element which has the same center as the control point. You see it's 50.200, and now here I've set the center of the circle to 50.200 as well. Now I save the file, and you can see in the browser here that it is drawn. Now you can see how this curve is being pulled towards the control point, but it doesn't touch it. Now let us try to move the control point so you can get an idea of how the curve will then be changed to be pulled towards the control point. First, let's move it to the left. Instead of at x equals 50, we set it to x equals 20. And I do the same here with the circle so that you can see what it looks like. Look at that. Now the curve is being pulled more to the left because we moved the control point to the left. Now let's try to move the control point down. So I move it down to 250. And I also move the circle down to 250 just so that you can better see the effect. And now you can see the curve is being pulled towards the control point. The cubic Bezier curve is similar to the quadratic Bezier curve, except it has 2 control points instead of 1. So let me first copy paste an example in here so you can see it. You can see the command is called C, and then it takes first 1 control point, then another control point, and then it takes an end point. And let us just save the file and look at the curve that is being rendered. As you can see, there's being drawn a curve from this end point here, from the start point to the end point here. And it has 2 control points which are both invisible, but I will show them with circles in just a moment. Here here are 2 circle elements which are located at the same point as the control points for the second curve. And you can see now when they are rendered, you can see how they pull the curve. And by moving these control points, we can also move how the curve is rendered. So let's have a look at that. Let us try to move 1 control point further to the left and down. And we will move the first one. So we move it to, instead of 225, we move it to 200, and then instead of 350, we move it to 400. And I have to move the circle as well so that you can better see what the control point not what it looks like, but where it's located and how it pulls the curve. So let's have a look over here. Now you can see I've moved the control point to the left and down, and that also means that the control point is pulling more in the curve in this side. The last drawing command to talk about is the set command, like this. And what this does is it closes the path, so it will draw a line from the endpoint back to the starting point of the path. Let's just have a look at that. There you see, from this endpoint here back to the starting point, the very first point from which the path was started, which is 100 by 100 as specified by the M command here. All of the drawing commands come in an absolute and a relative position version. The absolute versions, they draw their line or arc or curve to an absolute point inside of your SVG diagram, whereas the relative position version of the command will draw to a point that is relative to the current pinpoint. To show you the difference between the relative and the absolute drawing commands, let me here try to change this line command right here from an absolute command to a relative command. And the way you do that is you simply change the letter from the uppercase to the lowercase. And that is the same for all of the commands. So in case you want to use a relative arc command, you just change the A here from an uppercase A to a lowercase a, or with the cube or with the quadratic Bézier curve, you change from an uppercase Q to a lowercase Q, or here from an uppercase C to a lowercase c. There is no difference between using an uppercase set and a lowercase set, so you can just keep it uppercase. But let's return here to the line. Now the meaning of the endpoint changes. Before, when you use the uppercase L, the endpoint means the absolute position 150 by 150. But now this means 150 by 150 away or relative to the last endpoint of, or the current pinpoint, which is the endpoint of the last drawing command. In this case, we have moved to the point 100 by 100, which means that drawing a line to the point 150 by 150 relative to this point means actually drawing a point to the a line to the point 250 by 250. And let us just have a look at how that looks in the browser. Look, it is this line here that we are changing, the very first line here, and look how now that is changed. Now you can see it goes all the way down here, and then the rest of the curve the rest of the path looks the same because we're using absolute commands for all the rest of the drawing commands. Now let me show you what happens when I change a few more of the commands to these relative position commands instead. Let's change this line here. Now it's 150 by 200 away from the endpoint of the last drawing command here. And I will also change the arc command to a lowercase a. And let's have a look at what happens over here. Now look how the second line is now not drawn to the absolute point 150 by 200, but to a relative point, which is 150 by 200 away from the endpoint of the last drawing point. Now we draw this way. Now look at the arc, it's the same. It's not drawing to the point which is 100 by 150, the absolute point. Is drawing to a point that is relatively 100 by 150 away from the endpoint of the last drawing command, which is here. And since the curve commands are using absolute commands, they tend to still look the same. Now, of course, the first curve does not look the same because its starting point has been moved down here. You can see this is drawing the curve all the way up here to this endpoint up here. Yeah. Here. And you can see how the control point is still pulling it. But the second curve going from here and over here is looking the same because the endpoint of the first curve is the same as it was before because it's an absolute version, an absolute precision curve command, and since the second one is also using that, then they still look the same. Now that we have looked at the path drawing commands, let's have a look at how to change the look of the stroke and also how to change the filling of it. Let me first replace this curve with this path with a more simple path that is easier to see what it looks like. And here it is. This is simply drawing. It consists of 4 line commands. It will draw a line from relatively 50 to 0 from this point here. Then that is a horizontal line, then a vertical line, then a horizontal line back towards the left, and then a vertical line back up. So this will result in a small square. Look at that. If you look at the corner of this square, you can see that it looks like there's a pixel missing. And in order to get that fixed, I will simply close the path using the set command. That way there should be drawn a line fully back to the starting point, and now you can see it's looking correct. I will also just remove the 3 circles marking the control points, because now the curves are gone, so we don't need them anymore. And now you can see over here that the control points are gone. And now I will change the color of the stroke, and I do that simply by changing the value of the stroke style property from this is a red color to a blue color, like this. Look over here, now the square is blue, and I can change the width of the stroke. Let me first try to make it 1. Now you will see it's very thin, and if I want it to be wider, I simply change the number here up to 5, and look, now the stroke is very wide. Now let's try to make the stroke dashed, and you do so using the stroke dash array style property, and I set a dash of 10 and a space between the dashes of 5. And now let's have a look at how that looks. Now many of these style properties are covered by themselves in later videos, but I will just cover them quickly here. We can also change the fill of the square. Instead of having a fill of none, I can set it to a red color like this. And now let's have a look at how that looks over here. Yeah, there's a, you see, it uses black whenever it doesn't understand the color. And look, there's a 0 missing, and now it's red. You can also make the path transparent using the fill opacity stroke style property, and there's also a stroke opacity style property, and I will just demonstrate how the fill opacity looks by copying first the path, and since it uses all relative drawing commands, all I need to do is to move the starting point of the path, and then the square will be drawn perfectly on top. The second path will be drawn on top of the first path, as you can see here. Now I change the or I add the fill opacity style property. I set it to a value of 5, which means it will be semi-opaque, which is the same as semi-transparent. And look at this. Now you can actually see the first path through the filling of the second path. But look, you cannot see the first path through the filling of the second path, through the stroke of the second path, because we haven't set the stroke to be transparent. And we can do that using the stroke opacity style property. We set it to 0.5 as well, and then we draw over here, and now you can see the stroke of the second path has become semi-transparent as well. Now if you look closely, you can see that the filling and the stroke now overlaps and creates such an effect where the you can actually see the fill through the stroke. This may or may not be what you want, but at least I mean, that is what is happening. And that pretty much covers what you can do with the path element. It's a pretty powerful element. It's also a little bit complex, so you will have to spend some time getting to know it or mastering it. But I really recommend that you spend that time because, as I said, it's really powerful. And once you get the hang of it, it's really a very good tool. Pretty much any other shape that you can draw using, like the rect or the line or the ellipse or the circle element, you can draw as well with the path element.